Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg and Twitter CEO and founder Jack Dorsey facing very tough questions about user protection, the Russian election interference, and, of course, political bias, among other topics. Google, the lone invitee not attending today's hearing, still took some serious heat. Let's take a listen.
I have to say, though, I'm deeply disappointed that Google, one of the most influential digital platforms in the world, chose not to send its own top corporate leadership to engage this committee. Because I know our members have a series of difficult questions about structural vulnerabilities on a number of Google's platforms that we need answers for.
To our panel now, cybersecurity expert Leeza Garber, and back with us, Madison Jessiano. Leeza, let me start with you. Obviously, or ostensibly, it was about meddling, interference, the use of social media to usurp or undermine our democracy. Of course, there were other layers to it. As a cybersecurity expert, were you satisfied with what you heard? Because we got a midterm election coming up. We know it's going to be the ultimate test.
There are so many pieces to this puzzle, and quite frankly, no, I wasn't satisfied with how this went. It was much more sophisticated, much more high-level questions than we saw a couple months ago with Zuckerberg in front of Congress.
Everyone knew how to work email.
Everyone knew how to work email. Everyone knew somewhat how this technology operates and how they make money. But there are still so many questions about transparency, regulation, competition, and bias. And when you get to these election questions, the fact that Sandberg couldn't answer whether they could say how much money was made from certain advertisements that were politically centric, that's a real problem.
I thought that was disingenuous as well. I mean, obviously she was polished. She prepped for this. This is why they hired her in the first place, right? Someone who was seasoned enough to go in there and wow these congressmen and women. But the fact of the matter is, I thought she was too polished. Now, maybe I'm a little biased. I've met with Jack Dorsey a couple of times. I think he's sincere, but I still believe Twitter is waiting too long to do the right thing.
I agree with you. And I think Dorsey was more believable in his answers. I think both of them were withholding. Google was obviously withholding. They're all holding back on what their algorithms actually do, what goes on behind the scenes. But a lot of it did seem disingenuous because really we need to ramp up the cybersecurity. They're so far behind as it is.
All right. Hey, listen, I want to listen to one question that Jack Dorsey had to answer about America and it being a superpower and a great country.
Do you see a difference between cooperating with the United States government and the Russian government or the Chinese government?
Do I see a difference? I'm not sure what you mean.
Is Twitter an American company?
We are an American company.
Do you prefer to see America remain the world's dominant global superpower?
I prefer that we continue to help everywhere we serve, and we are pushing towards that.
So, Madison, that's when the numbers are going through your head. Do we make more money outside of the country than in the country? Obviously a difficult position, perhaps, although you would think it's an easy answer. But maybe that's the heart of the matter. Maybe their constituents for these companies aren't just Americans, right? And they feel the need to appease or to help everyone somehow.
Yeah, I think that should have been a much easier answer than what it was for him. I was a little disappointed to hear that as an American-based company. I think Twitter should have more faith in America, in our democracy. And as a patriot, I feel I would have answered differently than he did if that were my company. But to each his own.
What about Google not being
I think it's despicable that Google didn't go. I think they should have been there. I think there's a lot of answers, like she said, that we need to hear. And if we can't even ask the questions, how are we going to be able to
That's a serious amount of arrogance, I think.
It's arrogant, and it's short-sighted because these companies, the American lawmakers are saying, help us regulate you. Take part in this conversation. And for Google not to show up is so silly and short-sighted because really there is going to be regulation down the road. It's inevitable. It has to happen. Right. So why not be proactive and be a part of that conversation?
It was petty for them not to show up, really.
Very petty. All right. Thank you, ladies, both very much. Appreciate it. Reality star Kim Kardashian West back at the White House again and again working on prison reform.